The silence stretched for nearly a full minute before Ambassador Zethrak spoke, his crystalline form pulsing with slow, deliberate light patterns that indicated deep thought. "The Council must be informed of this development," he said carefully. 69 species operating outside our oversight represents a significant shift in galactic power dynamics. Marcus nodded calmly. "That's why I'm here today. The community has voted to formally request recognition from the Galactic Council." General Chromax's forearms gestured dismissively. "Recognition? You speak as if your alliance is somehow equal to the established powers that have maintained galactic stability for millennia." "Not equal," Marcus replied. "Different. The Council maintains stability through carefully balanced threats and territorial agreements. We maintain stability by making sure everyone has a stake in keeping the peace." High Matriarch Salix ruffled her feathers thoughtfully. "Your methods are certainly unconventional, but scale matters in galactic politics. The hegemony alone controls over 3,000 star systems. And how many of those systems would fight to defend the hegemony if it was threatened?" Marcus asked mildly. The question hung in the air like an accusation. Everyone in the room knew the answer. The hegemony's worlds were conquered territories, held in line through military occupation and the constant threat of retaliation. If the hegemony showed weakness, half their systems would rebel within days. "Loyalty through fear is still loyalty," General Chromax growled, but his tone lacked conviction. "Is it?" Marcus activated his holographic projector one more time, showing recent intelligence reports that made several beings shift uncomfortably in their seats. "Our analysis suggests that the hegemony currently faces active resistance movements in over 400 star systems. The Vorthan Empire has 3 major rebellions ongoing in their outer territories. Even the Nexari Confederation has seen 17 worlds petition for independence in the past year." The Zentari diplomat's wings fluttered nervously. "How did you obtain classified intelligence reports?" "We didn't obtain them," Marcus said with a slight smile. "They were given to us by resistance movements across your territories. Turns out that when species hear about a community where different peoples work together as equals, they start asking why they should accept oppression from their current rulers." Ambassador Zethrak's form flickered rapidly, a sign of extreme agitation in his species. "You're fomenting rebellion across established territories." "We're not fomenting anything," Marcus replied calmly. "We're simply existing. The fact that our existence makes other species question their circumstances isn't our responsibility." The implications were staggering. The major galactic powers had maintained control for thousands of years, based on the assumption that their way of doing things was the only viable option. The idea that there might be alternatives had never seriously been considered. "What exactly are you proposing?" the Luxari asked, his silver skin taking on an almost metallic sheen that indicated stress. Marcus consulted his datapad, then looked around the room with the expression of someone about to make a reasonable business proposal. "The community of free worlds would like to request a formal seat on the Galactic Council, with full voting rights and recognition as a sovereign political entity." The room exploded into chaos. Every diplomat began speaking at once, their voices overlapping in a cacophony of outrage, disbelief, and calculation. "Absolutely impossible," General Chromax roared above the noise. "The Council represents established civilizations with proven track records of galactic leadership. Your community is barely a decade old," Ambassador Zethrak added, his chiming voice cutting through the din. "You have no precedent for requesting such recognition." High Matriarch Salix's voice carried over the others. "The Nexari Confederation required 3 centuries of demonstrated stability before being granted council membership." Marcus waited patiently for the uproar to die down before responding. "The Nexari Confederation conquered 50 worlds through military force and held them for 3 centuries, through threat of violence. We've peacefully united 69 species through shared values and mutual benefit in less than a decade. Which approach better demonstrates the leadership qualities the galaxy needs?" The comparison was uncomfortably accurate. Every major council power had achieved their position through conquest, intimidation, or economic manipulation. The idea that cooperation and mutual aid could be equally effective challenged their fundamental assumptions about power. "Power structures exist for reasons," the Kavari diplomat said, his multiple eyes focused intently on Marcus. "Without clear hierarchies, without established authorities, galactic civilization would collapse into chaos." "Would it?" Marcus asked. Or would it evolve into something better? He activated his projector again, but this time the hologram showed something none of them had seen before. A real-time tactical display of community space, with hundreds of worlds represented as points of light connected by streams of trade, communication, and mutual support. This is what we've built, Marcus said proudly. 69 species, 6,000 worlds, 15 trillion citizens, and not a single ongoing conflict. No occupying armies, no tribute systems, no subjugated populations. Every world is there because they choose to be there. The Zentari diplomat's wings went completely still as she studied the display. No conflicts? That's statistically impossible across such a large population. No wars, Marcus corrected. We have disagreements, disputes, occasionally heated arguments. But we resolve them through negotiation and compromise rather than violence. Compromise is weakness, General Cromax stated flatly. Strong civilizations impose their will on weaker ones. That's how progress is achieved. Marcus turned to face the reptilian general directly. General, how many worlds has the hegemony's progress made uninhabitable through warfare? The question struck home. The hegemony's military campaigns were notorious for their scorched earth tactics. Entire planets had been reduced to radioactive wastelands rather than risk them falling into enemy hands. Military necessity sometimes requires difficult choices, General Cromax replied, but his tone was defensive. And how many worlds has community cooperation made uninhabitable? Marcus asked quietly. The answer was obvious, and the silence that followed was damning. Ambassador Zethrak's form pulsed with agitated light patterns. Even assuming your methods are effective on a small scale, they cannot possibly work across the diversity of galactic civilization. Some species are fundamentally incompatible. Some conflicts have no peaceful resolution. Like the Anthari-Rigelian dispute we resolved last year, Marcus asked. Those species had been at war for 2 centuries before joining the community. Their hatred was so deep that diplomatic contact was considered impossible. He manipulated the holographic display to show 2 vastly different worlds orbiting the same star. One was a crystalline paradise where silicon-based life forms built cities that looked like living gemstones. The other was a volcanic hellscape where plasma-based entities existed in conditions that would instantly kill most carbon-based life. The Anthari and Rigelians fought because they fundamentally couldn't understand each other, Marcus explained. Silicon-based thought processes operate on geological timescales. Plasma-based entities exist in microsecond consciousness bursts. They literally couldn't communicate meaningfully. High Matriarch Salix leaned forward with professional interest. How did you resolve a communication barrier that fundamental? We didn't, Marcus admitted. They did. When both species realized that the community would support them regardless of their differences, they found motivation to solve the problem themselves. It took 18 months, but Anthari scientists developed quantum resonance chambers that could slow their thoughts to Rigelian speeds, while Rigelian engineers created temporal acceleration fields that let them experience Anthari consciousness cycles. The implications were staggering. 2 species that had been locked in eternal warfare had become research partners when given the right environment and support. Now, they're collaborating on projects that neither species could accomplish alone, Marcus continued. The Anthari-Rigelian Quantum Consciousness project may revolutionize how we understand the nature of sentient thought. The room fell silent again, as the gathered diplomats began to understand that they weren't just witnessing an unusual political development. They were seeing the emergence of something that could fundamentally change how galactic civilization functioned. And for the first time in thousands of years, the established powers were not in control of that change. The tension in the room was palpable, as the full implications of Marcus's words settled over the gathered diplomats. General Cromax was the first to break the silence, his forearms crossing defensively over his armored chest. You speak of cooperation and community. But what happens when this idealistic system faces a real threat? The Devourers were a minor inconvenience compared to what lurks in the dark spaces between galaxies. Marcus's expression grew somber. You're referring to the Void Seekers. Every being in the room went completely still. The Void Seekers were spoken of only in whispers in the deepest security briefings of major galactic powers, ancient, incomprehensible entities that consumed entire star systems, leaving nothing but empty space in their wake. No civilization had ever successfully fought them. When they appeared, the only option was evacuation and prayer that they would move on. Ambassador Zethrak's crystalline form dimmed to barely visible levels. How does humanity know of the Void Seekers? That information is classified at the highest levels. Because we've fought them, Marcus said quietly. The statement was so shocking that for a moment, nobody could process it. The Zentari diplomat's wings began trembling. The Kavari diplomat's multiple eyes went wide with disbelief. Impossible, High Matriarch Salix whispered. No species has ever engaged the Void Seekers in direct combat. The Council's standing orders are immediate evacuation of any system where they appear. Marcus activated his holographic projector once more, but he hesitated before displaying the images. What I'm about to show you is classified at levels that don't officially exist. The only reason I'm authorized to share this information is because of what happened in the Council chambers last week. The hologram materialized, showing a star system that none of the observers recognized. 3 planets orbited a yellow star, with extensive orbital infrastructure and billions of inhabitants across multiple species. The Kurlan system, Marcus identified, home to the Kurlan Republic and refugee populations from 6 different species. 2 weeks ago, our deep space monitoring stations detected spatial distortions consistent with Void Seeker approach vectors. The peaceful system in the hologram suddenly twisted, space itself seeming to fold and tear as something massive began to emerge from dimensions that shouldn't exist. The entity that appeared defied description, part energy, part matter, existing in more dimensions than most minds could comprehend. Standard protocol would have been immediate evacuation, General Cromax said, his voice barely controlled. Any military commander would have ordered full retreat. Any sane military commander, Marcus agreed. But the Kurlan Republic had nowhere to evacuate to. Their ships were old, their technology limited. 3 billion people couldn't be moved in time. The holographic Void Seeker began its work, extending tendrils of impossible energy toward the inhabited worlds. Where they touched, matter simply ceased to exist, not destroyed but somehow removed from reality entirely. So what did your community do? The Luxari asked, though his tone suggested he already feared the answer. What we always do, Marcus replied. We stood in front of the innocent and said no. The hologram showed ships arriving in the Kurlan system, but not just human vessels. The familiar configurations of dozens of species appeared alongside Earth ships, forming a defensive formation that surrounded the endangered worlds. 423 ships, Marcus recited from memory, representing 37 different species. The largest combined fleet ever assembled for a single engagement. Ambassador Zethrak's form flickered with rapid calculations. 400 ships against a Void Seeker? The casualties must have been total, Marcus interrupted. We lost every ship in the first engagement. The room went silent again, but this time the quality of the silence was different. It wasn't shock or disbelief. It was horror at the scale of sacrifice Marcus was describing. But, Marcus continued, his voice carrying quiet pride, we bought the Kurlan Republic 18 hours. 18 hours that allowed their evacuation fleets to reach safety. 3 billion people survived because 423 ship crews decided their lives were worth trading for innocent strangers. The Zentari diplomat's voice was barely a whisper. Your entire combined fleet was destroyed to save one system. Our entire first wave fleet, Marcus corrected. When the Void Seeker moved to pursue the fleeing refugees, it encountered our second wave. The hologram shifted to show another impossible sight. A second fleet, even larger than the first, positioned between the cosmic horror and the evacuation routes. But these ships were different, their configurations modified in ways that seemed almost desperate. 600 ships this time, Marcus continued. Every vessel we could find retrofit or steal from mothball fleets. We had 48 hours to prepare while the Void Seeker consumed the abandoned Kurlan worlds. High Matriarch Salix leaned forward intently. What modifications did you make to your ships? We turned them into weapons, Marcus said simply. Every reactor was overloaded. Every weapon system was jury-rigged to exceed safety limits. Every ship was designed to cause maximum damage when it was destroyed. The battle that played out in the hologram was unlike anything the gathered diplomats had ever witnessed. Ships didn't fight to survive, they fought to die effectively. Each vessel that fell took part of the Void Seeker with it, their sacrificial explosions somehow disrupting the entity's impossible structure. The second wave bought us another day, Marcus continued, long enough for our scientists to analyze the data from both engagements and develop what we call the convergence protocol. General Cromax leaned forward, his military mind trying to understand tactics that seemed to operate outside normal physics. What kind of protocol? We discovered that void seekers exist partially outside normal space-time, Marcus explained. They can be disrupted if you can force them back into conventional dimensional frameworks, but it requires precise coordination of quantum resonance fields across multiple ship-mounted generators. The hologram showed the final engagement, and it was the most terrifying yet. Hundreds of ships from dozens of species moved in perfect synchronization, their modified weapons creating energy patterns that seemed to grab reality itself and twist it around the Void Seeker. It took 3,000 ships, Marcus said quietly. 3,000 crews who knew they were flying into certain death. But they also knew that if they succeeded, they would prove that even Void Seekers could be stopped. The cosmic entity in the hologram began to convulse, its impossible form struggling against the dimensional constraints being forced upon it. Slowly, incredibly, it began to shrink, its multi-dimensional structure collapsing into something that conventional weapons could actually damage. Did it work? The Kavari diplomat asked, his multiple eyes focused intently on the display. The Void Seeker was destroyed, Marcus confirmed. For the first time in galactic history, one of these entities was not just driven away but actually killed. The room erupted in excited conversation as the implications hit home. For millennia, the Void Seekers had been considered an unstoppable force of nature, like hurricanes or supernovas. The idea that they could actually be fought and defeated changed everything. The casualties, Ambassador Zethrak said, his voice heavy with the weight of the numbers. 3,000 ships, tens of thousands of crew members, 47,312 souls, Marcus said, his voice carrying the weight of each name. We remember all of them. Their sacrifice didn't just save the Kurlan refugees, it gave the galaxy a weapon against the darkness. But High Matriarch Salix was studying the data with the eye of an experienced strategist. The resources required for such an engagement. Your community must be severely weakened. Marcus shook his head slowly. We're stronger than we've ever been. When word spread about what happened at Kurlan, we received applications for membership from 26 new species. Civilizations that had remained isolated for centuries decided they wanted to be part of something that could stand against the ultimate darkness. The holographic display changed one final time, showing current fleet dispositions across community space. The numbers were staggering, not just in terms of raw ship counts, but in the diversity of technologies and tactical approaches represented. 69 species now, Marcus said with quiet satisfaction. Over 6,000 inhabited worlds, and every single one of them knows that when the darkness comes, they won't face it alone. The gathered diplomats sat in stunned silence, trying to process what they had learned. Everything they thought they knew about galactic power structures had been turned upside down in the span of a few hours. The number hit the room like a physical blow. 43 species represented more worlds than some of the major galactic powers controlled through conquest and intimidation. The Zentari diplomat's wings went completely motionless as she struggled to process the implications. 43 species, Ambassador Zethrak repeated, his crystalline form flickering with rapid calculations. That would represent hundreds of worlds, billions of citizens. 417 inhabited systems, Marcus confirmed, consulting his datapad. 2 trillion sentient beings who have chosen to work together rather than exploit each other. General Cromax's reptilian features twisted into something resembling disbelief. This community of yours, what prevents member species from betraying each other? What enforcement mechanisms ensure loyalty? Marcus looked genuinely puzzled by the question. Why would they betray each other? Every species benefits more from cooperation than they ever could from conflict. Because that's what species do. The Kavari diplomat interjected, his multiple eyes focusing intently on Marcus. They compete for resources, territory, strategic advantages. It's the natural order. Natural for who? Marcus asked mildly. Humans spent most of our early history fighting each other over exactly those things. We nearly destroyed our own planet multiple times. But we learned that cooperation creates more resources than competition consumes. The holographic display shifted to show economic data that made several beings lean forward in their seats. Trade volumes, resource sharing agreements, and technological exchange programs formed a complex web connecting dozens of star systems. The Centauri Republic increased their agricultural output by 300% after adopting human farming techniques, Marcus explained. In exchange, they shared their quantum computing technology, which revolutionized our space navigation systems. High Matriarch Salix studied the economic projections with professional interest. Impressive efficiency gains. But surely there are disputes over resource allocation, territorial boundaries. There are disagreements, Marcus acknowledged. But we resolve them through negotiation rather than warfare. When the Valdoran system needed rare minerals for their medical research, 17 different species contributed materials rather than letting them trade away their cultural artifacts to mining corporations. The Luxari diplomat, who had remained silent since Marcus began his presentation, finally spoke. This is all very idealistic, but reality is more complex. What happens when member species have conflicting interests? When cooperation becomes impossible? Marcus nodded thoughtfully. That's actually happened several times. The most serious case was when the Rigelian Collective discovered that mining operations in their space were damaging archaeological sites sacred to the Anthari people. The room waited expectantly for Marcus to describe the military intervention or economic sanctions that must have followed. Both species asked the community to mediate, Marcus continued. We established a joint commission with representatives from 5 different cultures. They spent 8 months developing new mining techniques that could extract the needed materials while preserving the archaeological sites. General Cromax's 4 arms gestured dismissively. Months of negotiation? Any effective military would have resolved the issue in days. By destroying one side or the other, Marcus agreed. But both species got what they needed, and the techniques developed during the process have been adopted by mining operations across 40 different worlds. Conflict would have given us one winner and one bitter enemy. Cooperation gave us innovation that benefited everyone. The concept seemed to genuinely baffle the gathered diplomats. Their civilizations had achieved greatness through conquest, intimidation, and careful manipulation of power balances. The idea that complex problems could be solved through patient cooperation rather than decisive force challenged their fundamental understanding of how the galaxy worked. Ambassador Zethrak's form chimed with uncertainty. Surely this community must have some form of military leadership, unified command structure for defense against external threats? We do, Marcus confirmed. But it's not what you'd expect. The holographic display changed to show a military organization chart that defied conventional understanding. Instead of a traditional hierarchy with clear command structures, the diagram showed interconnected networks of specialized forces. Every species contributes what they do best, Marcus explained. Valdorans provide medical support and evacuation services. Centaurians handle long-range reconnaissance and intelligence gathering. Humans specialize in, he paused, considering his words carefully, desperate situations. Desperate situations? The Centauri diplomat asked. Humans have a particular talent for fighting when the odds are hopeless, Marcus said with quiet pride. When everyone else has retreated, when conventional tactics have failed, when the situation requires someone to hold a position that can't be held, that's when you call humans. The room absorbed this in uncomfortable silence. These beings understood military doctrine, and they recognized what Marcus was describing. Every major military force had elite units for impossible missions, but those units were typically small, highly trained, and carefully preserved as strategic assets. You use your entire species as a suicide force? General Cromax asked, his voice carrying something that might have been respect mixed with horror. We use our entire species as a last resort, Marcus corrected. When civilization itself is at stake, when innocent lives hang in the balance, humans will fight until victory is achieved or every one of us is dead. High Matriarch Salix's feathers ruffled with agitation. But that's military insanity. No commander would waste troops so carelessly. We're not wasted, Marcus replied firmly. We're invested. Every human who dies protecting others is an investment in a galaxy where our children can live safely. The Kavari diplomat's eyes swiveled as he processed this philosophy. But your population growth must be severely impacted. Constant casualties, dangerous missions. Our population is growing faster than any species in known space, Marcus interrupted, displaying demographic data that made several beings recalculate their assumptions about human society. How is that possible? The Luxari demanded. Marcus smiled again, and this time the expression carried deep warmth. Because when other species know that humans will die to protect their children, they go to extraordinary lengths to protect human children in return. The holographic display shifted to show human colonies and stations, but now the observers could see details they had missed before. Valderan medical centers operated in every human settlement, providing health care far advanced beyond what Earth's technology could achieve. Centauri Republic educators taught human children alongside their own. Nexarian engineers maintained defensive systems that far exceeded human manufacturing capabilities. Every human child grows up knowing that 42 other species consider their safety a personal responsibility, Marcus explained, and every human adult knows that their sacrifice means something lasting. The room fell into another extended silence as the gathered diplomats began to understand the true scope of what they were witnessing. This wasn't just an unusual military alliance or a temporary cooperation agreement. This was a fundamental reimagining of how galactic civilization could function. The Council, Ambassador Zethrak said slowly, represents the most powerful civilizations in the galaxy. We maintain order through careful balance of force and influence. We know, Marcus replied. We also know that your system has been in place for thousands of years, and conflicts continue to erupt regularly. Wars still consume entire star systems. Weaker species are still exploited by stronger ones. The Outer Rim territories exist in almost constant chaos. General Chromax leaned forward aggressively. Are you suggesting the Council has failed in its responsibilities? I'm suggesting that the Council has succeeded brilliantly at maintaining the status quo, Marcus said diplomatically. But the status quo isn't working for species like the Ilarians or the Valderans or the dozens of others who get caught between major powers. The implications hung in the air like an unspoken challenge. These beings represented the pinnacle of galactic power, but a species they had dismissed as insignificant was quietly building something that might make their entire system obsolete. The silence stretched on as the gathered diplomats processed what they had witnessed. Finally, General Chromax spoke, his gravelly voice carrying an undertone of confusion that seemed alien coming from such a feared warrior. Your species committed suicide for strangers. This is not logical military doctrine. No commander would approve such wasteful tactics. Marcus turned to face the reptilian general, his expression unchanged. Every human commander in the sector approved those tactics, General. Admiral Chen gave the orders personally. Admiral Chen? The Kavari diplomat's multiple eyes blinked in sequence. Related to you? My sister, Marcus said simply. She commanded the task force that engaged the Krellans. The revelation sent another ripple through the room. Ambassador Zethrak's crystalline form flickered with inner light as he processed this information. Your own sister ordered the destruction of her fleet? And you support this decision? I'm proud of it, Marcus replied without hesitation. And so is every human in the galaxy. High Matriarch Salix ruffled her feathers nervously. But surely your military leadership must have objected. The loss of strategic assets, the breakdown in command structure. There was no breakdown, Marcus interrupted. Every captain volunteered for the mission. When Admiral Chen called for ships to respond to the Ilarian crisis, she had more volunteers than vessels available. The Zentari diplomat's wings began fluttering again, a sign of deep agitation in her species. This cannot be standard human behavior. No civilization could sustain such losses. Marcus activated his holographic projector again, but this time the images that appeared were different. Instead of battle scenes, the display showed human colonies across known space, modest settlements on dozens of worlds, research stations in asteroid belts, and small trading posts on the edges of civilized space. These are our people, Marcus explained, gesturing to the scattered points of light. 47 colonies, each with fewer than 1 million inhabitants. We're spread thin across the galaxy, and individually, each settlement is defenseless. The display zoomed in on one colony world, showing humans working alongside alien refugees from a dozen different species. Catherian tentacle engineers collaborated with human technicians to build atmospheric processors. Faldoran artists taught human children while human doctors treated ailments in species they'd never encountered before. New harmony. Marcus identified the colony. Population, 600,000 humans, 200,000 refugees from conflicts across the Outer Rim. General Cromax leaned forward, studying the images with professional interest. You house refugees? What strategic advantage does this provide? None, Marcus admitted. It costs us resources, creates security challenges, and complicates our defensive planning. But when the Devourers attacked the Stori Republic, where else were the survivors supposed to go? The hologram shifted to show another colony. This one clearly built around a massive medical complex. Ships from dozens of species docked at orbital stations while streams of patients were transferred to the planet's surface. Haven Station, Marcus continued. We built it after the Nexarian plague outbreak. Every human colony contributed resources to establish the largest trauma center in this sector of the galaxy. No payment required, no questions asked, no one turned away. The Luxari slowly shook his head, his silver skin still pale. The economic burden must be enormous. How do you justify such expenditures to your population? We don't need to justify saving lives, Marcus replied. That's what humans do. Ambassador Zethrak's form chimed with what might have been confusion. But your species has needs. Resources to allocate. Strategic interests to protect. Surely you prioritize your own people's welfare? Marcus nodded thoughtfully. Of course we do. That's exactly why we help others. The statement seemed to confuse everyone in the room. The Kavari diplomat's eyes swiveled independently as he tried to process the apparent contradiction. Explain, demanded General Cromax. Humans learned something important during our early space exploration, Marcus began, his voice taking on the tone of someone recounting a fundamental truth. We discovered that the galaxy is full of civilizations willing to destroy each other over resources, territory, or ideology. War, conquest, exploitation, they're constants across every star system we visited. The gathered diplomats shifted uncomfortably, aware that their own civilizations were guilty of exactly what Marcus described. But we also learned that every species, no matter how alien, values the same basic things. They want their children to be safe. They want their communities to thrive. They want to build something lasting that will outlive them. The holographic display changed again, showing scenes from across human space. Human soldiers helping rebuild Valdoran cities. Human engineers designing better defensive systems for peaceful species. Human medics training local doctors to treat conditions they'd never encountered before. When humans help others survive, we make the galaxy a safer place for our own children, Marcus explained. When we teach others to defend themselves, we reduce the number of conflicts we'll face in the future. When we prove that different species can work together, we create allies who will stand with us when we need help. High Matriarch Salix tilted her head, studying Marcus with new interest. You're suggesting that altruism is actually a form of long-term strategic planning? I'm suggesting that humans understand something many galactic civilizations have forgotten, Marcus replied. Strength isn't just about the size of your fleet or the power of your weapons. It's about knowing that when crisis comes, you won't face it alone. The room fell silent again as this concept sank in. These beings were accustomed to thinking in terms of power blocks and strategic alliances, temporary partnerships based on mutual benefit. The idea that a species might build genuine relationships based on shared values was almost incomprehensible. Impossible. General Cromax finally rumbled. Military strength determines survival. Your species learned this when the Devourers attacked. You suffered massive casualties. We suffered casualties, Marcus agreed. But we also learned something important about ourselves and our allies. He activated the holographic projector one final time, showing the aftermath of the Battle of Titan. Human ships hung damaged and broken in space, their hulls scarred by weapons that outclassed anything in Earth's arsenal. But surrounding them were vessels from a dozen different species, providing medical aid, engineering support, and defensive screens while human crews recovered. The Devourers expected us to surrender after the first engagement, Marcus explained. Most species do, but when they came back for the killing blow, they found something they didn't expect. The hologram zoomed out to reveal the full scope of the defensive formation. Human ships formed the core, but they were reinforced by Valdoran medical vessels, Stori Republic cruisers, even a few Nexarian frigates. Every species we'd helped over the past decade sent ships to defend Earth, Marcus said, his voice quiet but proud. The Valdorans brought their hospital ships to treat our wounded. The Centaurians provided their advanced sensor arrays. The Nexarians shared their shield technology. General Chromax's forearms crossed and uncrossed as he processed this information. A coalition fleet. But temporary alliances are common during major threats. This wasn't temporary, Marcus corrected. This was permanent. When the second wave of Devourers arrived 6 months later, the same species responded immediately. When they attacked Valdoran space a year after that, human ships were part of the defensive fleet. The implications were staggering. The gathered diplomats began to understand that they weren't looking at a minor species that had gotten lucky. They were seeing the foundation of something entirely new in galactic politics, genuine cooperation based on mutual respect rather than mutual fear. The Zentari diplomat's voice was barely audible. How many species are part of this alliance? Marcus smiled for the first time since entering the room. We don't call it an alliance. We call it a community, and the answer is 43 species and growing. The holographic display flickered to life, showing star charts that several beings recognized immediately. The outer rim territories appeared in three-dimensional detail, with red markers indicating conflict zones. But these weren't the sanitized reports that reached council chambers. These were real-time tactical assessments, complete with casualty figures and strategic analyses. 3 weeks ago, Marcus began, his voice steady despite the tension in the room. The Krellin horde broke through the Valdoran defensive line at Kepler 442. Within 6 hours, they had orbital supremacy over 4 inhabited worlds. The images shifted, showing the systematic destruction of Valdoran cities. Beings in the room shifted uncomfortably as they watched civilian transports being hunted down by Krellin raiders. The Valdorans were a peaceful species, known for their art and philosophy rather than military prowess. Ambassador Zethrak's crystalline form dimmed slightly. We are aware of the situation in the Outer Rim. The Council has been debating appropriate responses for weeks. Debating, Marcus repeated, letting the word hang in the air. While the Krellins moved to their next target. The hologram changed again, showing a blue-green world that resembled Earth in many ways. Cities dotted the continents, connected by gleaming transportation networks. Orbital habitats housed millions of civilians who had never known war. Sanctuary Prime, whispered High Matriarch Salix. The Ilarian homeworld. Marcus nodded grimly. Population 2 billion. Military capability minimal. The Ilarians redirected their resources to medical research decades ago. They've saved countless lives across the galaxy with their vaccines and treatments. The peaceful world in the hologram suddenly erupted with explosions. Krellin warships descended like vultures, their plasma weapons reducing cities to ash. The orbital habitats with nowhere to flee became death traps as raiders systematically destroyed life support systems. The Krellin fleet arrived yesterday, Marcus continued. 47 capital ships, 200 escort vessels, and enough ground forces to occupy every major population center. General Chromax straightened, his forearms uncrossing. Intelligence suggests the hegemony doesn't have assets in that region. How did you obtain real-time battlefield footage? Instead of answering, Marcus manipulated the display. The viewpoint shifted to space above Sanctuary Prime, where the Krellin fleet hung like a dark cloud. But something was wrong with the image. The alien ships were retreating, pulling back from their attack positions with visible urgency. Because, Marcus said quietly, we were there. The hologram zoomed out, revealing shapes that had been hidden by the planet's shadow. Ships emerged from concealment, their hulls scarred and patched but still functional. They weren't large by galactic standards, and their designs were unfamiliar to most beings in the room. The Zentari diplomat's wings fluttered nervously. Those vessels... I don't recognize the configuration. Human ships, Marcus confirmed. The UES Defiance, UES Retribution, and UES Never Again, along with 12 escort frigates. We'd been tracking the Krellin movement for weeks. The room erupted in surprised murmurs. The Kivari diplomat's multiple eyes widened. Impossible. Human vessels couldn't match Krellin firepower. Your technology is centuries behind theirs. The holographic battle played out before them. The human ships moved with desperate precision, using hit-and-run tactics that turned their technological disadvantage into strategic opportunity. They targeted Krellin engines and weapon systems, avoiding direct confrontations while systematically crippling the larger fleet. But what truly shocked the watching diplomats was what happened next. The human vessels positioned themselves between the Krellin fleet and the planet's surface, taking devastating hits while Ilarian civilian transports evacuated the most vulnerable population centers. "Your ships are being destroyed," the Luxari observed, his earlier dismissive tone replaced by something approaching respect. "Yes," Marcus agreed simply, "but the Ilarians are escaping." The UES Retribution, its hull breached in a dozen places, rammed a Krellin dreadnought that was targeting a refugee convoy. The explosion was visible from orbit, taking both ships and clearing a path for the fleeing civilians. High Matriarch Salix leaned forward, her iridescent feathers ruffling. Why? Why would humans sacrifice themselves for a species they barely know? What possible strategic value could the Ilarians provide? Marcus turned to face her directly. Strategic value? The Ilarians developed the cure for Nexarian plague. Their research saved millions of your people's children. The matriarch's beak opened slightly in surprise. The Nexarian plague had indeed ravaged their young decades ago, and Ilarian scientists had worked tirelessly to develop a treatment, asking for nothing in return. But that's not why we're there, Marcus continued. We're there because it's the right thing to do. The battle in the hologram reached its climax. The remaining human ships, battered and barely functional, continued their desperate defense. The UES Defiance, its captain clearly knowing the ship was doomed, used the last of its power to destroy a Krellin carrier filled with ground assault troops. General Chromax's reptilian features showed confusion. This makes no tactical sense. You're throwing away military assets for no gain. No gain? Marcus's voice carried an edge now. 2 billion Ilarians are alive because 15 human ships decided their lives mattered more than our strategic position. The holographic display shifted again, showing the aftermath. Krellin ships limping away from Sanctuary Prime, their fleet command structure disrupted by the unexpected resistance. The planet's surface showed damage from the initial attack, but evacuation efforts had saved most of the population. The Krellins withdrew. Ambassador Zethrak's crystalline form chimed with disbelief. They never retreat from an engagement they're winning. They weren't winning anymore, Marcus explained. Our ships transmitted full tactical data to every military frequency in the sector before they were destroyed. Krellin fleet positions, weapon capabilities, strategic plans. Every species in the Outer Rim now knows exactly how to hurt them. The implications hit the room like a physical blow. The Zentari diplomat's wings went completely still. You gave away military intelligence, strategic data that could have provided humans with significant advantages. To save people who can't defend themselves, Marcus confirmed, and to give others the tools they need to protect their own worlds. The Kavari diplomat's voice was barely above a whisper. How many human ships were lost? All of them, Marcus said simply. 347 crew members gave their lives to protect strangers. Captain Martinez transmitted her final message just before the Defiance's reactor overloaded. He manipulated the hologram one last time, bringing up an audio recording. A woman's voice, calm despite the chaos surrounding her, spoke into the silence of the diplomatic chamber. This is Captain Elena Martinez of the UES Defiance to any ship receiving this transmission. We are about to lose main power. But the evacuation routes are clear. Tell our families we died as humans should die, protecting those who cannot protect themselves. Tell them Earth remembers its children, and we are proud to be among them. The recording ended, leaving absolute silence in its wake. For long moments, no one moved or spoke. These beings had witnessed countless battles, negotiated through endless conflicts, but they had never seen anything quite like this. The Luxari slowly sank into a nearby chair, no longer concerned with seating arrangements. His silver skin had taken on a pale, almost gray tint. Marcus looked around the room, meeting each being's eyes in turn. That's why I'm here, not representing one world or one species. I'm here representing an idea that every sentient life has value, regardless of whether they can defend themselves or offer us something in return. Marcus Chen adjusted his worn military jacket as he stepped into the pristine waiting area of the Galactic Council's diplomatic station. The fabric had seen better days, bearing the scars of countless battles across a dozen worlds. Unlike the other beings in the room, he carried no ceremonial weapons, wore no gleaming armor, and displayed no marks of nobility. The station's artificial gravity felt heavier than Earth's. But Marcus had grown used to alien environments. Around him, Representatives from across the galaxy sat in elegant chairs, their conversations creating a symphony of clicks, whistles, and harmonic tones that the universal translator struggled to process. To his left, Ambassador Zethrak of the Vorthan Empire occupied 3 seats with his massive crystalline form. The being's body sparkled with inner light, each facet reflecting the station's soft illumination. His species had conquered 40 star systems through sheer technological superiority, and their ambassador's presence commanded immediate respect. Across the room, High Matriarch Salix of the Nexari Confederation preened her iridescent feathers while reviewing holographic documents. Her people were master strategists, having orchestrated the peaceful unification of over 60 worlds through careful diplomacy and economic manipulation. Every gesture she made was calculated, every word precisely chosen. Near the massive viewing port, General Chromax of the Hegemony stood motionless, his 4 arms crossed over his armored chest. The reptilian warrior species had never lost a war, their military machine so efficient that entire civilizations surrendered rather than face them in battle. His scales bore the ritual scars of 100 victories, each mark telling a story of conquered worlds. Marcus found an empty chair near the back and sat down quietly. The moment he settled, conversations around him shifted. Not stopped, but changed in tone. Several beings glanced in his direction, their expressions ranging from curiosity to barely concealed disdain. A Zentari diplomat, resembling a graceful mantis with gossamer wings, leaned toward her companion. Is that really one of them? A human? Her voice carried easily in the thin atmosphere, though she likely thought she was being discreet. Her companion, a bulbous-headed Kavari with multiple eyes, nodded slowly. I believe so, though I expected them to be larger. Their reputation suggests something more intimidating. Marcus pretended not to hear, focusing instead on the holographic display showing today's agenda. The Galactic Council was convening to discuss the ongoing conflict in the Outer Rim, where several younger species were locked in devastating warfare. As usual, the major powers would debate intervention while smaller civilizations suffered. Excuse me, a melodious voice said above him. Marcus looked up to see a tall, elegant being with silver skin and flowing robes. The Luxari were known for their refined culture and technological marvels. I believe you're in my seat. Marcus checked his admission tablet. According to this, I'm assigned to seat 47B. The Luxari's expression remained polite but firm. There must be some mistake. This section is reserved for full council members and their primary representatives. Perhaps you'd be more comfortable in the observers' gallery? Around them, conversations had indeed stopped now. Every eye in the room focused on the exchange. Marcus felt the weight of their attention, the mixture of anticipation and amusement. Many of these beings had never seen a human in person, and fewer still had any real understanding of what his species was capable of. I'm here on official business, Marcus said calmly, holding up his credentials. Sergeant Marcus Chen representing Earth's interests in today's proceedings. The Luxari examined the holographic identification with obvious skepticism. Earth isn't a full council member. Your species was granted observer status only 3 years ago, and that was considered quite generous given your limited sphere of influence. A ripple of agreement passed through the room. The Hegemony General's lip curled in what might have been amusement. One world, he rumbled in a voice like grinding stone. They represent one small world in an unremarkable system. Why the Council granted them any recognition at all remains a mystery. Ambassador Zethrak's crystalline form chimed softly, his species equivalent of laughter, perhaps as a curiosity. Their planet did produce some interesting mathematical theorems before they achieved spaceflight. Primitive but occasionally clever. Marcus remained seated, his expression unchanged. He'd encountered this attitude on every station, every diplomatic mission, every first contact scenario. To the galaxy's established powers, humanity was nothing more than a recent arrival from a backwater system. One planet, minimal resources, no significant military presence, and technology that lagged behind galactic standards by centuries. High Matriarch Salix spoke without looking up from her documents. The humans do have one notable achievement. They survived first contact with the Devourers without immediately surrendering. Most species either flee or submit when those monsters appear in their space. Barely survived, corrected the Zentari diplomat. From what I understand, They lost half their fleet in that encounter. Hardly an impressive showing. Marcus's jaw tightened slightly at that. The Battle of Titan had indeed been costly, but these beings didn't understand the full context. They saw only the numbers, the casualties, the apparent defeat. They hadn't been there when Captain Rodriguez ordered the Harmony to ram the Devourer mothership, buying precious time for civilian evacuations. They hadn't witnessed Lieutenant Park's squadron holding off superior forces for 18 hours straight, fighting until their ammunition was exhausted and their ships fell apart around them. The Luxari was still standing beside his chair, clearly expecting him to move. I'm sure you understand. This is simply how things are done. Protocol must be observed. Of course, another voice chimed in. A Catherian representative with multiple tentacles gestured dismissively. Perhaps the human doesn't understand our customs. Their species is quite young after all. Only recently achieved faster-than-light travel, didn't they? Barely a decade ago, confirmed the Kivari diplomat. Still learning how civilized species conduct themselves. I'm sure once he understands the proper order of things, he'll find an appropriate place to observe from. Marcus looked around the room, taking in the faces of beings whose civilizations spanned millennia. Each represented thousands of worlds, billions of citizens, technological marvels that humanity could barely comprehend. By any reasonable measure, they were right. Earth was insignificant, humanity a newcomer that had achieved nothing worthy of respect. He stood slowly, and several beings nodded approvingly, mistaking his movement for compliance. Instead, Marcus reached into his jacket and withdrew a small device. The room's lighting dimmed as he activated a holographic projector, casting images into the air above them. Before I move, he said quietly, his voice carrying clearly in the sudden silence, I think there's something you should all see.